Well, with exactly 2 weeks until Election Day, President Donald Trump is upping his immigration rhetoric. Here's what he had to say about the migrant caravan in Mexico at a rally last night in Texas.
That is an assault on our country. And in that caravan, you have some very bad people. You have some very bad people. And we can't let that happen to our country, and it's not. We need a wall built fast, fast. We have to protect our borders. We don't have borders, we don't have a country.
Joining me now, Gabe DeBenedetti. He's a national correspondent for New York Magazine. So, Gabe, you heard the president there. He's been touting that there are criminals and Middle Easterns in this caravan. No evidence to show of that. What do you read from this about the president's midterm strategy at this point? Well,
as you said, there's no evidence here. As far as we can tell, it's a fact-free lie. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to gin up his base. He's trying to gin up Republican supporters with the strategy of fear. This is not anything new. We see this every few years. But it really is telling about the state of how the president's backers feel about what he's been doing. Because you would think that after 2 years of complete Republican control in Washington, they'd be able to run on something other than this kind of fear. However, what they're doing is essentially trying to use the same kind of anti-immigrant, rhetoric that they've long used to try and get voters, particularly in places like Texas and like Arizona, for example, where there are competitive races, to turn out and vote for the Republicans.
Are Republicans on Capitol Hill? You talk about how this is sort of helping potentially in some of these races. Are Republicans taking the president's lead and using this type of rhetoric on immigration?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this for a long time. It's not necessarily, this is not a Trump-specific thing, but he's just someone who's been using it, specifically on recent races and specifically to try to gin up the base in a newly intense way that we haven't seen in recent years. But there are Republicans all over the place that are essentially trying to scare their voters into voting. This is, again, not a new strategy, but as the midterms get closer and as it becomes clearer that Democrats really are turning out in higher numbers than we've seen in recent years, Republicans are resorting to this kind of strategy of fear.
You know, talking about policy as we get closer to midterms, the president is touting a new tax plan that he wants to push forward. I want to play a soundbite for you from the president.
We're going to be putting in a 10% tax cut for middle-income families. It's going to be put in next week. This is for middle-income people, all middle-income people, a big tax cut, 10%. We'll be putting it in next week.
Tax cut put in next week, according to the president. His economic advisor said that they're consulting with Congress. But here's the thing. Congress is out of session until before midterms. So what's going on here?
Yeah, to make a long story short, it sounds kind of like everyone was shocked to hear about this, both in the White House and on Congress, because Congress, of course, is not working right now. They're all out campaigning. It seems like this is not real at all, but the president is talking about this largely to, again, gin up voters, to essentially say if you vote Republican, you're going to get a tax cut. But the real, again, bigger lesson here is that the president already did a big tax cut that, House Republicans thought of and presented as this historic move. But again, voters are not really talking about that.
So is that why they're pushing this forward now? I mean, he's done this tax cut, so why introduce another one, right?
I don't think anyone actually believes he's going to introduce another one. It's just something that they're talking about for the midterms. I would be pretty surprised if we were still talking about this on November 7th.
Interesting. Speaking of talking through midterms, trying to counter President Trump's message, President Obama yesterday, while campaigning in Nevada, had some interesting words. I want to play that for you.
I believe in a fact-based reality and a fact-based politics. I don't believe in just making stuff up. I think you should actually say to people what's true.
Remember a time when presidents didn't criticize other sitting presidents? It seems like an eternity ago. Obviously taking a direct jab at the president here. What's going on here, and what is the Democrats' message at this point? Is it working?
Well, certainly there are a lot of different Democratic messages right now, and I think what a lot of them would argue is essentially when you look at the individual candidates and individual campaigns, most of them are talking about health care, they're talking about local economic issues, and that really is working in a lot of these districts. But there is a broader question about who is the right Democrat to stand up and push back against these falsehoods that President Trump is pushing forward, like the ones that we've talked about. Obama is clearly trying, but Democrats are very careful here. They don't want their national message to just be anti-Trump. So that is sort of the tightrope that they're watching here. And, we'll see how much that works over the next 2 weeks.
Gosh, 2 weeks can be an eternity in politics, so we'll have to see exactly what goes down before midterms. Gabe DeBenedetti, thank you very much for joining us, Gabe.
Thank you.
I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Errol Barnett, who's been following the latest from our D.C. bureau. Errol, give us a sense. I know this can be so complicated. What exactly did Bolton say about the fate of that nuclear arms treaty?
Well, Bolton there acknowledged that the formal withdrawal that makes it official that the U.S. is pulling out of this INF has not yet been issued. And that gives you the sense that when President Trump made the announcement on Saturday, it was really part of a negotiating tactic to get Russia to be in compliance, or at least prove that it is. This all centers around these intermediate range weapons, which Russia says, hang on a minute, we're not in violation of this agreement because the missile in question doesn't go as far as is prohibited under this agreement. And you heard the National Security Adviser there, John Bolton, effectively say that Russia would need to prove that. In the background to all of this, you have the relationship between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The other headline coming out of Bolton's meeting in Moscow today is that President Putin says he is open to meeting with President Trump. Bolton shared the same sentiment from the commander-in-chief, and that could take place next month, November 11th in Paris at the 100th anniversary celebrations marking the end of World War I. So this could all just be negotiating and jockeying ahead of that potential one-on-one meeting next month. The other headline is that the National Security Advisor brought up to President Putin the suspected election meddling that has been taking place, is taking place. Bolton saying that it damages the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. Some comments coming from President Putin, according to reports, is that he is apparently sometimes surprised by the unprovoked U.S. actions that are hard to call friendly. And when Bolton had a gift, or at least described the U.S. coat of arms, which has olives and arrows, President Putin joked, asking if the eagles ate all of the olives, kind of suggesting that, you know, what's happening to the peaceful gestures here. So National Security Advisor John Bolton over there to speak on behalf of President Trump ahead of those two heads of state, Trump and Putin, meeting possibly next month.
You know, Errol, we heard Bolton say that they're not in compliance. I'm reading about this today. Somebody had written, one man's intercontinental missile is another man's strategic weapon. How do they get Russia to the table? Does the U.S. have the leverage at this point?
It's a great question, and leverage is the key word. This is all about pressure. You know, after President Trump made this announcement on Saturday, we had Germany's foreign ministry responding and saying that this treaty affects some of the core interests of European allies, and Germany would have liked to have been consulted if the U.S. is going to withdraw. You also heard John Bolton there refer to China's response to this move. China saying that the U.S. should stay in this treaty, but you also heard Bolton there say that if China was a part of this INF, it would be in violation because of a third of its arsenal, which is able to reach the ranges in question. So this is all about President Trump's effort, number one, to get, or at least look as if he's putting pressure on Russia to stop with its election meddling. And we can see reports today of the U.S. intelligence services sending signals to those that it knows is taking part of this misinformation campaign. But it also wants to show that it wants Russia in compliance. And so all of these are kind of the push and pull of diplomacy that we see at work right now. It will be interesting to watch closely and see what, if anything, comes out of this Trump-Putin meeting next month in Paris, because you've got so many other major global issues that stem from the relationship of these two men.
Absolutely right. Errol Barnett coming to us from Washington. Errol, thank you so much.
You got it.